Diddle-dum-dum, diddle-dum-dum, diddle-dum-dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
and you
and you and you.
Duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association.
And this is the official film program of Public Radio, KCBX San Luis Obispo. And across the aisle from me tonight, wait a minute.
Underneath the table.
Tonight, and I do mean literally, it's the one, the only Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, just taking off his civil defense helmet, the one and only czar of film on the Central Coast, a man I'm proud to call my friend, Jim Dee.
Good to see you, Bob.
Good to see you too, Jimmy. You're a little irradiated at the moment, but we'll work on that.
Well, tonight's topic, interestingly introduced with the song Duck and Cover from the 1950s. A suggestion from one of our listeners, David. A big thank you for acknowledging the 20-year anniversary of the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Also, in the year 2006, it seems like nuclear weaponry and warfare are still in the news, in the order of the day, some 60 years plus since the end of World War II. And tonight's edition of Take Two, we're going to be looking at how we got to know about the atomic bomb and atomic power, and usually through films that you may have seen in a movie theater or maybe in a classroom. But films getting across the idea of what the atomic bomb was supposed to be, what it's not supposed to be, the same thing with atomic power. A little bit later on, too, we're going to have a very interesting mystery clip. Maybe not a mystery to some of our listeners, but we'll throw a curve at you at about 7 o'clock of a clip that you'll maybe question while we're playing it on this show, but we'll tell you why. So we're ready to roll here.
This is Atomic Film 101. And as we started out with the infamous Duck and Cover, a government-produced film in the 1950s about the ABCs of surviving a nuclear attack. Duck and cover.
Yeah.
Cover yourself with something and you'll be just fine. We know that was false.
We do.
But a catchy theme. Bert the Turtle was, let's face it, for a whole generation of American kids growing up with civil defense drills, this was standard fare. This would all be survivable. Yeah, I believe it.
You know, Bob, I think of tonight's show as we're sort of treading this line of maybe snickering a little bit at the Duck and Cover, and there's also that sort of, at this time, we were nuclear novices. The bomb had barely, had been discovered, or this is ultimate power. In fact, I do think we need to use that word tonight when we're talking about the gravity of our subject. I mean, when you're talking about nuclear bombs or nuclear power, you're talking about ultimate destruction, perhaps ultimate power. Later on in the show, we'll talk about power being the ultimate aphrodisiac, but we'll get to that a little bit later. But, the world really came into a new phase when atomic power was discovered. It's rather a daunting notion that humans have the power to destroy the world.
Many times over.
Yes.
And, our government was one of the first producers of the atomic film, as we saw with Duck and Cover, but they were also putting out quite a few atomic safety films, trying to put people's minds and consciences at ease. They were producing films around the clock. not very believable films, but they were very prolific. In fact, I think we have another example of a nuclear safety film, which is good for a few Snickers, but believe it or not, folks, people wanted you to believe this 50-plus years ago.
With the knowledge of the first atomic explosions to guide us, our chances for survival will be far better than those of the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, if we act on our knowledge and are prepared. The first job is to look over your own home for shelter possibilities. If you live in a private home that is well built, the cellar is the safest place to be. The lower you get, the more barriers there are likely to be against blast, heat, and radioactivity.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Absolutely. In fact, I think if we could make a connection between the past and the recent present, we could say the humorous and tragically humorous statements of the Department of Homeland Security a few years ago with the talk of duct tape and plastic sheeting kind of echoed these sentiments, these simplistic sentiments. And I think, Jim, what these early films, I think what they were really trying to do was calm fears.
Yes.
I don't think anybody who was really close to the Manhattan Project or the other atmospheric tests at Bikini or had checked out Hiroshima and Nagasaki after the fact really believed that such inane measures could actually work. But I guess the idea would have been to calm fears on the home front, give people an idea that maybe there's something you can do about this. Of course, it's also creating false hope as well.
You know, Bob, as we discuss this, I think of us straddling that line between, again, snickering, listening to these safety films, and the very dark other side where there's deception going on, and of course, this calming is really deception. But again, going back to that idea that here we are in the 50s, very new at the nuclear information, new at the nuclear game, and maybe the innocence that we hear in some of these films is maybe there's a speck of genuine innocence in these, even though I do believe what you say as far as the calming effect that these have, because the idea of the atomic bomb is devastating.
Well, Jim, back in the 50s, the early 50s in Las Vegas, people would get together before an atmospheric test, and they would have a barbecue. They'd get up on the roof of a building or some high point and watch the explosions. It was kind of like a fun thing to do. I mean, there's stories of some of the great entertainers like Luigi Prima and Keely Smith and all their friends, playing all night and then partying all night and then being up in the morning at dawn watching the H-bomb go off.
Boy.
Is it patriotism? Maybe. Curiosity? Certainly. Stimulating? Oh, I'm sure, absolutely. Unless, of course, you're about 60 miles closer to the event where you would be vaporized.
Yeah, I would say when you're adding to those words, misinformed may have been it, but at this point, again, it was something to do the next day. It was a spectacular sight. In fact, we have another clip here from Duck and Cover, the actual film with that song, and it pretty much mirrors what you're saying. This talks about the atomic bomb and the effects, but well, here's a clip. Let's see what you think about this from Duck and Cover.
Now, we must be ready for a new danger, the atomic bomb. First, you have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You'll know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you were not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer. You know how bad sunburn can feel. The atomic bomb flash could burn you worse than a terrible sunburn, especially where you're not covered.
Well, I think about this, Jim. All the GIs that were exposed to the atmospheric tests, a lot of ranchers out in the West were exposed, and I don't know, tens of thousands became sick and died. Veterans of the bikini tests, a lot of people from Hiroshima who survived the initial blast. It's innocent, it's funny, but at the same token, well, it sounds innocent.
Yes, yeah.
And it sounds funny. But there's almost a criminal negligence there, too, that has to be touched upon as well. Come on, it's kind of appalling as well.
Before, Bob, when I used the word ultimate, I think that no matter what opinion you can talk about, either nuclear warfare, nuclear weapons, nuclear power, it is a subject about playing with fire. This is no matter how you spin it, no matter how you contain it, you know that there is a potential there, probably greater than most anything else on the planet, for problems. The long-term effects, I guess when you're saying that how many soldiers witnessed some of these explosions, and they would get up out of their bunker and just, walk towards the explosion. I've seen many films like that. Again, they misinformed, the naivety of the time. When you talk about criminal negligence, I sometimes think of that as a term from 2000 on or something. I'm sure it did exist back then, maybe not that term, but just the newness of it and the fact that it was so spectacular to see. And boy, I go back and forth from that sort of innocent feel of these clips to the really dark and sardonic manipulation of information and the calming effect, which is just deception.
And that's what's interesting about these early films, Jim, is that you get all of that from it. History was our guide. We can look back with hindsight, but there's such films as The Atomic Cafe that really emphasize these various elements. And that film is brilliant because it just uses the atomic films, the government films from that era, and the statements of the politicians at that time. There's no real current, mindset there. They just let them speak it in their own terms, in the context of its time. And when you put it all together, you're laughing and you're also appalled. Atomic Cafe, one of the great documentary films I've ever seen. Wonderful bit of archival experimentation, archival footage where they just put it together in a terrific, just a terrific 90 minutes or so presentation. Outstanding. There's also Trinity and Beyond, which is that came out about 10 years ago, narrated by Bill Shatner, and it has some of the finest digitally remastered bomb shots I've ever seen.
Ooh.
It's incredible. And they're blowing them up in outer space. They're blowing them up under the water. And they're just blowing them up everywhere. I'm surprised we're still here talking about it, quite frankly.
The other thought I had, Bob, too, is these films that we've been playing the clips of from so far, you might have seen in a classroom. And, when you're in a classroom and you're a kid, you would tend to think that all the information that you're getting, has some validity, or, gosh, that my teacher told me that this is right, instead of getting to the point where everything is wrong. I think it's the place where you saw these that had more of an impact on you as far as being the truth. So, boy, well, we go from these films that were proliferating in the 50s to another inevitable outcome of the discovery of atomic power and the atomic bomb, and that's the plethora. And here we go into a great part of the program, all those great monster movies from the 1950s. I mean, radiation can do anything as long as you've got a monster to show for it.
Well, you know what's great about this, Jim, is I think Hollywood really picked up the ball with this, especially kind of the low-budget Hollywood, and said, you know what? We can tell a story here because people, the bomb, the atomic bomb, is frightening people. Let's cash in on it. And what they did was create a whole genre of films that really captured the paranoia of the time behind the happy facade. And, okay, the monsters may not have been communists. There was plenty of that going on newspapers and television. Usually they were monsters from outer space, or more often than not, in the atomic context, they were people or everyday things that had been mutated to turn against us.
Yes.
Sometimes they're bugs. Sometimes they're our own children. Sometimes they're army colonels. Sometimes they're, the guy next door.
Take your pick.
Yeah, exposed to the atom. All bets are off.
Now, before we play a couple of clips from some classic monster films from the 50s that have an atomic origin, I do want to make note of a couple of films that we don't have clips from. And first of all, the very first Godzilla, which is, in my view, a terrifying film, as the later Godzillas, of course, the guy in the rubber suit, they have their own sense, they have their own charm. But the very first one, and I might recommend to our listeners, the original Japanese version of Godzilla is available. There's no Raymond Burr. The film makes a pointed ending of talking about the perils of the atomic bomb, because it took the atomic bomb for Godzilla to arise out of the depths wherever he came from. And of course, in this film, they do make that analogy that we're playing with fire, and that essentially, the atomic bomb is a monster that has been unleashed. And Bob, I think of the first Godzilla from 1954, I believe. And after Godzilla has traipsed through Tokyo, it looks like a city that's completely on fire. It looks like nuclear holocaust. I mean, and of course, let's talk about Godzilla's breath. That's supposed to be radiation coming out of his mouth, right? Or radioactive something.
Either that, or he really needs to have his teeth cleaned. I mean, for 2 million years, boy, his breath could be pretty bad.
But at least in that film, we're talking about the monster movies of the 50s. Godzilla is one of them, the first one. But that first film, the Japanese version, interestingly, the American version kind of gets into a little bit of the acknowledgement of the atomic bomb, but not like the original Japanese version.
Absolutely. In fact, the truncated, remessed with, for want of a better word, American version really loses all the pathos about the bomb. It tries to recreate that paranoia, but they don't touch upon the whirlwind that we have unleashed on the world, which is very much in evidence in the original Godzilla, where he's kind of a metaphor for the bomb. It is. It's a far more lyrical horror film, if such a word would apply. Yeah, I think it would.
I think so, too. The other lyrical film that, we're talking about, we are going to play a couple of interesting clips for you, but the one we don't have a clip from tonight is one of the best science fiction films of all time, and that's The Day the Earth Stood Still. And this is a nuclear film. It's about being warned that we are playing with fire now that we have discovered atomic power and atomic bombs. But if we mess with it in space, there's a higher power even than that that's going to, kick us.
If shut us down completely.
Right.
I think of the original War of the Worlds, Jim, or the original movie version from 1953, big year for the atom. in horror films and science fiction films, where they unleash the atomic bomb on the Martians with no effect. And it seems like at that moment, the Earth is completely beaten. Our most powerful weapon, useless against them.
Yeah.
Only to discover later that the little things, the bugs that will probably grow to be giants from all the atomic bombs we dropped on the Martians, will be mutated, and then they'll run amok, like in such films as Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Bob, that sounded like War of the Worlds 2.
I think I've hit on something there.
I think that was something you go to Griffin Mill and the Player and pitch that to him.
I like that.
Don't
Anybody get any ideas. This one's mine.
The bugs that saved us are now after us. Here is a great film from the 1950s and a perfect example of how the atomic bomb is used to introduce, in this case, the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Professor Tom Nesbitt and Colonel John Evans, military liaison, tensely wait. The timing is perfect thus far. It is now H-hour minus 56 seconds. Every man here knows his job. He does it quickly, efficiently, silently. The men are ready. The equipment is ready. It is now H-hour minus 52 seconds.
Operation Experiment to Y347. Operation Experiment to Y347. Over.
Y347 to Operation Experiment. Now leveling off. Ground speed 360. Approaching IP.
IP means initial point. The next 26 seconds will determine whether these men have succeeded or failed. Now we count the seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
At least have one of those during the show that we're talking about the atomic bomb. That is from the Beast from the 20,000 Fathoms, and of course after that explosion of that atomic bomb, it does unearth a dinosaur. Great Ray Harryhausen animated dinosaur.
You know what I find brilliant about this film, Jim? More than so many things, I got to say that clip is just so... It inspires so much tension. I'm watching Hank in there biting his nails in anticipation of the big blow. I mean, here you have the most powerful bomb yet devised. I got it. Let's take it to the North Pole and blow it up there. I'm kind of surprised we actually didn't try something like that. I don't know. To me, it just seems to make perfect sense. It'd melt all that ice,
Yeah, what the heck?
and it would help, the Arab countries. They'd get water or something crazy like that. I don't know. It also echoes a film that came 10 years later called The Day the Earth Caught Fire, and that film was a British film from 1962-63. Had your good friend Leo McKern, Edward Judd, Janet Monroe, and a very young Michael Caine. And what had happened was the Russians set off an atomic bomb, their most powerful one, on the North Pole, and the Americans set one off on the South Pole in McMurdo Sound, simultaneously, thus tilting the Earth's orbit and pushing it toward the sun. Which, at least with this one, we just unleash a dinosaur. And that means a Ray Harryhausen type dinosaur. And it's always good to see Ken Toby in a military army uniform taking on the monster. And I might add, very important note here, Lee Van Cleef wastes him like he would kill many in Euro Westerns 10, 15 years later.
Well, we're talking about the atomic bomb and its influence on the monster movies of the 50s. And we've got another one. Here's a classic where, we were talking about bugs before. Here's a clip from the film Them.
What is it? Species appears to be Camponotus fichinus. One of the family Formicidae. An ant.
An ant? I don't believe it. It's not possible.
Then this is what got Ed Blackburn and Gramps Johnson an arrest?
Yes, a fantastic mutation. Probably caused by lingering radiation from the first atomic bomb. Notice its odor?
Yeah. Formic acid? Well, then that's why that little girl reacted so violently.
And the coroner's report said that Gramps was filled with the stuff.
See that? It's the stinger. Ants use their mandibles to rend, tear, and hold their victims, but they kill with that, by injecting formic acid. Mr. Johnson was stung to death. There's no time to lose. We must find the colony, the nest.
You mean there's more of them?
Let's hope so.
And they don't let us down. There is more, a lot more. And let's face it, that's a great clip, Jim. You've got Edmund Gwenn as the scientist. You have James Arness and James Whitmore as the FBI agent and the New Mexico State Trooper, respectively.
Both looking very young.
And in the film, they represent every man. And here's the professor, kind of an eccentric, doting type, he'll tell you everything about how a 60-foot ant can kill. And what's great about this film, aside from the fact that it's very entertaining and a real pleasure to watch, it also kicked off the giant bug craze of the 50s, of which there was Tarantula with John Agar and Leo G. Carroll. There was
The Black Scorpion.
The Black Scorpion with Richard Denning and Mara Corday. And there was, Beginning of the End with Peter Graves and Peggy Castle with the giant locusts.
Or they look like big grasshoppers.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know. They said locusts, but they look like grasshoppers crawling all over the postcard images of Chicago. And, of course, we have none other than the great Bert I. Gordon to thank for that.
Oh.
And, the Earth versus the Spider with Ed Kemmer. That's another giant spider running amok. I mean,
we're all talking about films with that atomic bomb springboard. I mean, it's just like you say, with these films, and the writers grabbed a hold of this new technology, the explosive and the unknown quality of radiation, and they ran with it.
Perfect did they
springboard.
ever.
Okay, you're listening to Take Two, the movie program, and our next clip is that mystery clip that referred to earlier. We're just going to play it. I think you're going to recognize the voices easily. And for some of our listeners, I think they're going to say, yeah, we know why you're playing this clip. Others, maybe not, but we'll give you the lowdown right after this clip, and we'll take our break. Back in a moment with more of Take Two.
See to the sharing of the booty.
All?
Place her tent next to mine.
A fair prize, my son, if my eyes see well.
Fairer than you know, my mother. She is the daughter of Kumlik.
Kumlik's daughter. Spawn of evil. Let your slaves have their sport with her. I will not have her within our tents.
I say who stays in our tents. This woman is for my pleasure.
You will take pleasure with the offspring of your father's slayer? She will bring woe to you, my son, and to your people.
Stay, my mother. There will be feasting and rejoicing.
Rejoicing? The memory of your father is heavy in my heart, and for me there is no rejoicing.
No one likes us I don't know why. We may not be perfect, but heaven knows we try. But all around, even our old friends put us down. Let's drop the big one and see what happens. We give them money, but are they grateful? No, they're spiteful and they're hateful. They don't respect us, so let's surprise them. We'll drop the big one and pulverize them. Asia's crowded, Europe's too old, Africa's far too hot and Canada's too cold, and South America stole our name. Let's drop the big one, there'll be no one left to blame us. We'll save Australia, don't wanna hurt no kangaroo. We're building an all-American amusement park there. They got surfing too. Boom goes London, boom Paris. More room for you and more room for me. In every city, the whole world round will just be another American town. Oh, how peaceful it will be. We'll set everybody free. You wear a Japanese kimono, baby, be Italian shoes for me. They all hate us anyhow. So let's drop the big one now. Let's drop the big one now. Boom, 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 boom. I wanna go to the movie show, me and my baby. Come on, let's go. On to the movie show. Let's go.
This is Public Radio, KCBX San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara, streaming at kcbx.org. Funds for Take Two have been provided in part by Morin Brothers Automotive, which is newly expanded to better serve their customers. Frida the Diagnostic Dog invites you to check out her new digs at Morin Brothers, servicing Volvo, Saab, and most domestic and Japanese cars.
Funds for this program have also been provided in part by Roto-Rooter Plumbing and Drain Cleaning, locally owned and operated for over 40 years, serving all of San Luis Obispo County's plumbing and drain cleaning needs.
The creature from the Black Lagoon, Red River, color purple. I love the movies. Clark Gable, all the women out there.
We're back on Take Two, the movie program. My name is Jim Dee. Across the aisle, actually under the table, ducking and covering, is Bob Whiteford, and our projectionist tonight, the great Hank Hadley. We're talking nuclear films. Actually, we're connecting this to the anniversary of the accident at the Chernobyl power plant in April of 2006. That's the 20-year anniversary. Also talking about the fact that in the news of 2006, nuclear is still in the news, 60 years since the end of World War II. And we did play you a clip just before the 7 o'clock break, and you heard the voice of Agnes Moorehead and the voice of John Wayne. And folks, we're not saying that the film is a bomb, even though it is a bomb. But the reason we've included that on tonight's program is, well, Bob, you've got the story.
Well, the film I guess we're talking about is The Conqueror. It was made in 1953. By RKO Radio Pictures. It's the story of Genghis Khan, as portrayed by John Wayne, which, quite frankly, is pretty hideous to begin with. The film featured an all-star cast, which made its absolute disjointed and horrible runtime even more I'm even having a hard time describing the film itself. Folks, it's a mess. It was so bad. It was produced by Howard Hughes, directed by Dick Powell, both of whom really should have known better. But the film was shelved for many years. The interesting part of the film, the part of the film that's relevant to our discussion, is the backstory. The film was shot in St. George, Utah, using the great expanses out there as as a backdrop, doubling for Mongolia. Because, at the time, they couldn't take the film on the road and shoot it in actual Mongolia. So they went to an empty area in the west, in St. George, Utah, and did location filming there. Of course, about 2 months before the film crew came out there was an atmospheric bomb test, one of the largest hydrogen bombs up to that time ever detonated. Now, how it happened, I'm not sure, but the Atomic Energy Commission allowed the film crew total access to the area of the bomb blast, and they were able to film practically on ground zero. In fact, there was a famous publicity shoot there of the cast and crew playing softball right by the ground zero of the test. The tragic consequences thereof were evident about 10 years later when practically the entire cast came down with cancer. And of course, we're talking, first of all, about Big John Wayne. 1964, he had lung cancer and had to have a lung removed. He almost died. He was doing a film called Circus World when he was diagnosed. He ended up dying of cancer in 1979. Agnes Moorehead, the woman playing the Duke's mom in this film, she died of cancer, I believe in the early 70s, as did the other star of the film, Susan Hayward, died of cancer in the early 70s, as did one of the main players, Pedro Armendariz. He died of cancer in 1963. Well, actually, he was terminally ill. After he completed Dr. No, he ended up killing himself because the cancer was so bad. And just to round it off, Dick Powell, the director, he came down with cancer and died of cancer in 1963 or 64. Now, here's the weird part, as if that wasn't weird enough. When they shot in location, for the sake of continuity, they brought tons of dirt back from ground zero to build sets with in Hollywood. There'd be those phony sets where they're outside the tent and it's fake, but they used the actual dirt from the desert to at least try to make it look somewhat alike. So who knows how many people of the crew were afflicted by this as well? I mean, no one really knows. I'd be curious to find out. The listing of the stars, it's pretty clear that something went terribly wrong there. In fact, I think one of John Wayne's sons came down with cancer as well. So this is kind of the horrible backstory. In fact, there was a book written about this, I believe, like 25 years ago called Did America Kill John Wayne? And it goes into great detail about these atmospheric tests, the one in particular, and the tragic consequences for the cast and crew of The Conqueror.
Boy, a bad idea for the film itself and a bad idea for location shooting.
Just bad, period.
Yeah, boy. Anyway, we were just discussing The Conqueror with John Wayne from 1953, you said, Bob. And, tragic story behind that film. You know, Bob, we're going to get into an area now where when we get into the idea of the ultimate power that can be bestowed upon those who own all of a nuclear arsenal, let's just say, we're talking about, we'll use that word again, ultimate power. And of course, we've all heard the saying, I'm not sure what genius came up with the saying that, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. But we move on to the great film. We'll get there in just a moment. But Stanley Kubrick's great film, Dr. Strangelove, I think is about the only film that really gets into this kind of, dare I say, sexual undercurrent of these guys. I mean, the character of Jack Ripper, General Jack Ripper, not only is the culprit behind the launching of the nuclear bombs in Dr. Strangelove, but we also know that he's kind of has a problem with his sexuality, his sexual impotency, of course, his concern about precious bodily fluids. But we talk about missiles having kind of a phallic nature and things like that. Or let's just say you have ultimate power where everyone's got to bow down, the ultimate dominance and submission. Well, you've got the nukes, you've got the power, and I think that can go to your head. I think Dr. Strangelove is one of the few films that actually addresses that connection of wanting to dominate the world with your nuclear weapons, and, well, it takes the place of something else.
But Jim, what's interesting is that this was mentioned in reality during the bikini tests of 1946. Mm-hmm. In fact, we have a clip of the commander of Operation Crossroads, Vice Admiral W.H.P. Blandy, touching upon that very issue in terms of dealing with criticism directed at him for this massive atomic test during peacetime. Hank?
The bomb will not start a chain reaction in the water, converting it all to gas and letting all the ships on all the oceans drop down to the bottom. It will not blow out the bottom of the sea and let all the water run down the hole. It will not destroy gravity. I am not an atomic playboy, as one of my critics labeled me, exploding these bombs to satisfy my personal whim.
Well, Vice Admiral Blandy, why are you exploding these bombs anyway?
Well, perhaps we should ask Terry Southern, Stanley Kubrick, George C. Scott, Sterling Hayden, of course, Peter Sellers, their answer to this.
This is from Dr. Strangelove.
Mr. President, about 35 minutes ago, General Jack Ripper, the commanding general of Burleson Air Force Base, issued an order to the 34 B-52s of his wing, which were airborne at the time, as part of a special exercise we were holding called Operation Dropkick. Now, it appears that the order called for the planes to attack their targets inside Russia. The planes are fully armed with nuclear weapons with an average load of 40 megatons each. Now, the central display of Russia will indicate the position of the planes. The triangles are their primary targets. The squares are their secondary targets. The aircraft will begin penetrating Russian radar cover within 25 minutes.
General Turgidson, I find this very difficult to understand. I was under the impression that I was the only one in authority to order the use of nuclear weapons.
That's right, sir. You are the only person authorized to do so. And although I hate to judge before all the facts are in, it's beginning to look like General Ripper exceeded his authority.
It certainly does. Far beyond the point I would have imagined possible.
I've said it before, the genius of Stanley Kubrick is pulling a comedic performance out of George C. Scott, and he does so brilliantly in Dr. Strangelove. Plus, I think, as we're having this discussion right here on the air, Bob, I'm thinking of the word absurd, the absurdity of duck and cover, the absurdity of, making your house safe against the atomic bomb. And finally, we do have a film where absurdity is at the core of this film. I think that Stanley Kubrick was looking at emergency measures after the bomb, or how to survive the bomb, and even the smallest little glitch, the entire thing falls apart. In the film, where a dime is needed to call the Pentagon, why can't I think of it? It's Bat Guano.
Oh yeah, Keenan Wynn.
Keenan Wynn as with Sergeant Bat Guano.
Major Bat Guano.
Has to, machine gun the Coke machine to get the dime to make the call. And Kubrick, I believe in the interview, was just saying you could have the most elaborate emergency systems in place, but not having the dime, or let's just say an evacuation from a nuclear power plant and you've got a car running out of gas on the freeway, the whole thing falls apart. And I think that Kubrick just, in approaching this film, in fact, I felt that originally he was going to make Dr. Strangelove a serious film. Mm-hmm. And the more he researched the whole nuclear, the research that he did on atomic bombs and nuclear warfare, he just realized the absurdity of the whole affair.
Absolutely, Jimmy. Yeah, I believe it was originally planned to be a serious film. And I think he gets his point across quite well with the absurdity.
Yes.
And it does harken back to those films like Duck and Cover, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many of those that we can't even mention them all here on the show. But he got the absurdity. Terry Southern, when they were writing the screenplay for this, really touched upon it. And through our laughter, we could see the real horror of it all, the inevitable horror. And in a sense, what he was saying is, the only recourse we have is to laugh at it because it's that absurd. That's our best defense. And he scored big with this film.
He did.
Big.
But of course, we do segue to a film that came out around the same time as Dr. Strangelove, and here's another term that's almost as absurd as Duck and Cover. The name of the film is The Great Failsafe. We were talking about the same subject matter as Dr. Strangelove, where some bombers are heading towards a target, this time Moscow, and the so-called term failsafe, both fail and safe, don't apply, even though the Pentagon would like to think that they have a system that is fail-safe, or that these planes are not going to go past their so-called fail-safe points and go start dropping nuclear bombs. What's wonderful about comparing the two films, Dr. Strangelove and Failsafe, is the absurdity of Dr. Strangelove is, counterbalanced by Henry Fonda in Failsafe as a great president. I mean, he has open discussions with the premier of Russia. He has open discussions with the Pentagon and all these so-called experts. I mean, it was there's some great moments in this film where it's all these guys just trying to figure out how to get out of this scrape, and it's the way the government is portrayed in this film, Failsafe, Bob. I would like to think our government could be as open and willing to discuss, a problem, in this case, the ultimate problem, where the bombs are headed for the target and there's no turning back.
Some interesting performances in this film. I think of Walter Matthau as kind of a Kissinger-type diplomat, Cold War scientist who discusses openly the winnability of nuclear war. He's the definite hawk. In many ways, I find him far more terrifying than Dr. Strangelove.
Yes.
Because Peter Sellers' Strangelove is actually quite funny. Matthau's character, who we know him as a great comedic actor, but this particular performance, he's devoid of any humor at all. And he's cold, very cold, and it's a performance that I think is quite memorable by him. One of the best things he's ever done in a film that was unjustly lost in the wake of Dr. Strangelove, the big success of Dr. Strangelove. And in a sense, I think it bared out Kubrick's vision, because this film, Failsafe, is played straight. I think it was directed by Sidney Lumet, a great filmmaker.
I still think it's a fabulous film, and let's listen to a clip from Failsafe. This is Henry Fonda as the President of the United States, who is wiring the Premier of Russia. The interpreter is Larry Hagman, and as you probably already know, there are planes heading toward Moscow about to drop their payload. This is from Failsafe.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, this is the President of the United States. Do you hear me clearly?
Fine, Mr. President. How are you?
Mr. Chairman, I'm calling you on a matter of great urgency. I hope it turns out to be a small matter, but it's the first time it's happened, and if it's misunderstood, it could be...
Does it have to do with the aircraft we have detected flying towards Russia?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I suppose it's another of your off-course reconnaissance flights. Mr. President, we have warned you again and again that this constant flying of armed aircraft...
This is a mistake,
over
a
Soviet
serious
territory
mistake.
Cannot...
I say it's a mistake.
Very well. Tell me the mistake.
A group of our bombers, each loaded with two 20-megaton bombs, is flying towards your country.
We shall watch with great interest while you recall them.
So far, we have been unable to recall them.
Are the planes being flown by crazy men?
We're not sure. It might be a mechanical failure. All I can tell you is that it's an accident. It's not an attempt to provoke war. It's not part of a general attack.
How do I know you do not have hundreds of other planes coming in so low our radar cannot pick them up?
Because I hope to prove to you that it's an accident. That we take full responsibility, that we're doing everything we can to correct it.
Go on.
You must have seen that we sent fighter planes to shoot down the bombers.
American fighters to shoot down American bombers.
That is correct.
And you gave that order?
I did.
How do I know the planes were not simply diving to a low altitude to escape our radar?
On our plotting board, the action could only be interpreted as planes out of control. You have the same equipment we do. What did it tell you?
And so that conversation goes from Failsafe. It's just a fascinating film of, again, it's the concept of playing with fire, and here are these guys who, the planes got away from them, and all of a sudden the world is really at peril with the power of these bombs. Highly recommended, Failsafe.
That's a great clip. I was listening to it, and it's like I just was envisioning the scene. It was like once it got cut off, I was like, oh I wanted to hear the rest of it.
Sign of a great film. We're going to move on to two more films. The inspiration for our show tonight actually is the 20-year anniversary of the accident at Chernobyl. Interestingly, that accident happening in 1986, and it was actually, 7 years earlier where there was this, another tragic accident at a nuclear power plant in this country. And it's hard to think of 3 Mile Island and not think about the film that came out almost simultaneously and had nuclear power sort of at the center of the film. It was one of those almost unbelievable coincidences.
Very serendipitous.
Yes. The China Syndrome was released in 1979. Jane Fonda, Jack Lemmon, and Mike Douglas. And instant filling the theaters, and the fact that 3 Mile Island was almost timed, too perfectly with the release of this film. Let's hear a clip. This is, this film is really less about nuclear than about, corporate fraud. And of course, again, they've got something too hot to handle here, and you've got to fudge things. And this scene from the China Syndrome, Jack Lemmon has realized that photos of the containments in this nuclear power plant have just been used over and over again. This is from the China Syndrome.
Hey, Herman, we got a serious problem. What's the matter now? The pump checked out okay,
Oh,
didn't
hell,
it?
those were static tests. They're not going to tell us anything.
My God, Jack, listen to me, will you? You ran the damn thing up to 110% of rated speed.
Herman, that is not going to tell us what'll happen if we ever shut down again. If we spray him at full power, I'll tell you something. Any sudden shock to that
That's
system...
only in a
God
case of...
damn it, will you listen to me?
Take it easy, will you?
Once. I'm sorry, Anthony. I decided to go through the quality assurance reports. I came across some irregularities in the contractor's documentation of the pump support structure, right? So I decided to double-check the welding experts. This is just a sample. They're identical, Herman. It's the same picture over and over.
Come on, Jack. No contractor can possibly supply every stupid document the government calls for. So they didn't take all the pictures they were supposed to. So what? These x-rays are 6 years old here.
Oh, my God, so are those wells down there.
Hey, Jack,
Now, you listen. We should get new radiographs of the pump support structure.
Well, that's absurd. You know how long that would take, Jack? What it would cost? $15 to $20 million. Forget it. Go back to the control room and start her up, Jack. We got to get back online this afternoon. The company is losing $500,000 a day. Start her up, Jack.
Jack Lemmon and
Scott Brady
from the China Syndrome. And again, it could have been at any industrial plant, in this case, it was a nuclear plant. And I also think that this film has a fabulous performance by Jack Lemmon. And it's the idea that he believed in it so wholeheartedly. And through the course of the film, he realized again, playing with fire.
And another classic everyman performance by Jack Lemmon.
And one more film we would like to discuss as we're talking about nuclear power, of course. We're talking about Silkwood. Meryl Streep, great performance, in fact, just revisiting this film. And, Cher put in some great performances.
She was good in this.
She was very good. And this chronicles a true life story of Karen Silkwood, her exposure to radiation, and, of course, much like in the China Syndrome, where the corporate pressure to keep things under wraps, to, get rid of any whistleblowers is in force in this film. I'm not sure if we have time for our clip or not, but we have time for the clip, Hank? Okay, this is from Silkwood. Here is Meryl Streep and a group from the nuclear power plant who have been exposed to radiation. They're going to get a hearing at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and unfortunately, their concerns are not really considered very important. This is from Silkwood.
Bobby Beckwith tore a hole in his glove. Now, let me see if I can read this here. I think it says July the 23rd. Isn't that about right, Morgan? Yeah, that was right before Karen came back and they tried to pin the contamination on her. Well, the plutonium soaked right through his coveralls to his arm. What the hell's going on out there?
It's the National something Day.
Yeah?
Can't breathe.
What?
Can't breathe.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here about the respirators. We get these contaminations, you see, and sometimes we got to wear these masks for a week, 10 days, sometimes 12 hours a day.
Are you working 12 hours? They're late on the contract. They're running double shifts.
And they got us working in these respirators, and I want to tell you, it gets real hot.
Yeah, and they don't fit. I mean, mine doesn't fit.
What you people have brought in today is wonderful.
Oh, excuse me, I just wanted to say one thing. That was the thing about the showers. There are only 2 showers for 75 workers per shift. And it's not really clean, so, everybody wanted me to say something about that.
Right. It's probably best if we just stick to the stuff that's really connected with the radiation now.
Uh-huh.
That's from the film Silkwood, chronicling, the tough working conditions in this nuclear power plant, and, of course, the rather smoothing over that occurs in such a situation. I'd like to thank you for listening to Take Two, the movie program, and there is a great film record of our nuclear and atomic history that hopefully we partially covered tonight in response to listener David for recommending a film about atomic power and atomic bombs. Hope you appreciated the show, and we'll see you next week on the movie program.
Take care, everybody.